You know, my life before the Doe Fund was really, really different. I was a young actress that was brought to Hollywood, and then I was married to a really famous Hollywood writer-producer. And then I became a writer myself, and I lived in Beverly Hills, so that was pretty different. In the late 1980s, I was asked to write a screenplay about a homeless young girl named April who was living in Grand Central Terminal. And I came to New York to do my research for that film. And at that time, the city homelessness was rampant here. There were people living in doorways and sleeping on church steps and in the subway, and literally on subway grates in the middle of the street. And there were hundreds and hundreds of people that were living inside Grand Central Terminal. And actually, there were hundreds more that would crowd into the ramps, into the terminal, to escape the cold at night. And I was pretty overwhelmed. I met April Savino on a bench in Grand Central Terminal, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and the terminal was pretty quiet. And sort of out of nowhere, this little girl popped up. And that was April, and she was a teenager, and she had been abandoned there by her parents, and she was a crack addict. But she was really, really smart, and she could do the New York Times crossword puzzle in ink, and she did it every day. April was like, she was like a wild bird that kind of filled up the terminal with her frenetic energy. April knew absolutely everybody. She would panhandle for food, and she would charm money out of commuters' wallets, and she would actually share the food that she got with the weaker and more elderly people that lived in the terminal. And through April, I got to know an enormous amount of homeless people that were living there at that time. And what I realized was that each and every one had a personal story, and everybody had a dream and a desire for a better future. But what all the people really had in common was that they wanted to have a job and have a room and have some place to live, and they really wanted to have a real life. So I decided that I would give this little girl, this April, a chance, and that I would adopt her, and that I would take her home with me to Beverly Hills, and I would put her in drug treatment, and then I would raise her with my daughter, Abigail. Well, the last day when we were supposed to leave Los Angeles, April hid from me. And all the people that I had befriended, all the homeless people in the terminal, they looked for her, and we looked for her in the balconies, and we looked for her on the terminal floor, and they went below ground, and she lived in a little nest that she had built over a track under Grand Central, and we couldn't find her. So I thought, well, I'm going to write this great screenplay, right? And I'm going to save her life, and I'm going to change things for homeless people and the way that they're seen, and make people understand their humanity. And right after I finished the first draft, I got a call that April had killed herself. And she had stolen this little gun with a tape-wrapped handle, and she had tried to sell it all day for money for crack cocaine. And when she couldn't sell it, she went to the steps of St. Agnes's, and she put this little gun in her mouth, and she killed herself. And she was a kid. She was a child. So I came to New York to go to April's funeral, and it was in a Catholic church, and I'm Jewish, and I hadn't been in hardly any Catholic churches. And inside, the pews were filled with the homeless people who had known April. And a priest gave a eulogy, this really beautiful eulogy about how April was a shining star in the night sky. And afterwards, of course, in real Hollywood style, I went up to the priest and I said, well, I have the rights. And he kind of laughed at me and he said, the rights? Well, you know, April's dead. So we decided to meet and have a drink after he buried April. And we went to a bar in the village and I was crying and he comforted me. And I realized that he wasn't a priest. He was a homeless advocate, and of course it was George. And at that time, George had been feeding people for 2 years in Grand Central. He had never missed a night. And I think what most people don't know is that he was living in this tiny little SRO room, and it was literally like the size of a closet. And I always thought, because he's pretty tall, that if he stretched out his legs, that he would have burned his feet on the heating pole in the corner. And we talked, and we discovered that we had just a sort of amazing amount in common. And that we believed that homeless people could really change their lives. And we believed in personal responsibility and paid work and the people themselves. So we fell in love and we got married like literally in 2 minutes. And we decided to do this work together. And we did, and we created Ready, Willing, and Able, and we went to the homeless shelters that were 1,000 people sleeping right next to each other, and they were dangerous, and they were filthy, and that was the only thing that was available for homeless people at that time. And we went to the streets, and we went to Grand Central, and we told the people that we would give them an opportunity to go to work for money and give them a place to live if they would just promise to give up drugs and work hard. And literally, people walked from the shelters in Harlem, they got off the streets, they just lifted themselves up and right off the floor of Grand Central, and they came because they wanted to go to work. And 20 years later, the homeless people have never, ever disappointed us, never. And they have made New York City a cleaner and greener and safer city for all of us that live here. And they have changed their lives and broken the cycle of poverty and homelessness in their communities and become role models in those communities and fathers to their children, and the kind of people that we would all want to know, and I've been very fortunate to know them and to be part of their lives. When George and I started, we had this hope that one day the formerly homeless people would actually be the leaders of Ready, Willing, and Able, that they would be the role models, that they would lead the organization,